The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of the royal palace. Marcus had been standing guard at the main entrance for 3 hours, his armor gleaming under the golden light. He was 28 years old and had served the kingdom faithfully for 7 years. Every muscle in his body was trained for one purpose: protecting the royal family. The palace buzzed with its usual activity. Servants hurried through the corridors carrying silver trays. Nobles discussed politics in hushed tones, and children played in the gardens. Marcus watched everything with sharp eyes. His training had taught him that danger could come from anywhere at any time. That particular morning felt different, though. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The air seemed heavier, and he noticed how some of the palace staff kept glancing nervously at the shadows. His hand instinctively moved to the sword at his side. Princess Elena was scheduled to attend the morning council meeting. She was the king's only daughter and heir to the throne. At 25, she was known throughout the kingdom for her wisdom and kindness. The people loved her, but Marcus knew that love could also breed jealousy and hatred among those who opposed the royal family. As the princess walked through the main hall, Marcus fell into step behind her. Her long blue dress rustled softly against the stone floor, and her golden hair caught the sunlight streaming through the tall windows. She smiled and nodded to the servants and guards she passed, treating everyone with respect regardless of their station. The council chamber was located in the eastern wing of the palace. To reach it, they had to pass through a long corridor lined with portraits of past kings and queens. The hallway was dimly lit with only a few torches providing flickering light. Marcus felt his unease growing stronger with each step. Halfway through the corridor, Princess Elena stopped to examine a new painting that had been hung the previous day. It showed her late mother, the beloved Queen Isabella, who had died when Elena was just 15. The princess stood there quietly, lost in memories of her mother. Marcus positioned himself strategically, his back to the wall so he could watch both directions of the corridor. The silence was almost complete, except for the distant sounds of palace life echoing from other parts of the building. He scanned every shadow, every alcove, every possible hiding place. Then he saw it, a slight movement in the shadows near the far end of the corridor. Someone was there, pressed against the wall behind a large stone pillar. Marcus felt his heart rate increase, but he kept his expression neutral. Years of training had taught him never to reveal what he had noticed until he was ready to act. The figure in the shadows was completely still now, but Marcus had definitely seen movement. Whoever it was knew how to hide, which meant they were likely trained in combat or stealth. This wasn't some lost servant or confused noble. This was someone who didn't belong in the royal corridor. Princess Elena finished looking at the portrait and began walking again. Marcus stayed close, his hand now resting casually on his sword hilt. He needed to get the princess to safety, but he also needed to identify the threat. If he raised an alarm too early, the intruder might escape and try again later. As they moved closer to the mysterious figure, Marcus could make out more details. The person was dressed in dark clothing that helped them blend with the shadows. They were roughly average height and build, making it impossible to determine if they were male or female. Most importantly, Marcus could see the glint of metal in their hand. The princess was now just 20 feet away from the hidden figure. Marcus made his decision. He couldn't risk her safety any longer. In one swift movement, he stepped in front of Princess Elena and drew his sword partially from its sheath. "Your Highness," he said quietly, "please step back slowly." Princess Elena immediately understood the seriousness in his voice. She had grown up in the palace and knew that when her guard spoke that way, danger was near. Without question, she took 3 steps backward, her hand moving to grip the small dagger she always carried hidden in her dress. The figure in the shadows realized they had been spotted. In a single fluid motion, they stepped out from behind the pillar, revealing themselves fully. They wore a black mask that covered their entire face except for their eyes, which gleamed with cold determination. Their dark clothing was form-fitting and practical, designed for quick movement and stealth. Marcus now saw what the person held in their hand, a throwing knife with a razor-sharp blade that caught the torchlight. The weapon was perfectly balanced, the kind used by professional assassins. This was no amateur attempt at violence. Someone had sent a trained killer after the princess. The masked assassin and Marcus stood facing each other in the dimly lit corridor. The distance between them was perhaps 15 feet, close enough for the knife to be deadly accurate. Princess Elena remained behind Marcus, her own breathing controlled despite the fear that must have been coursing through her. For a moment that seemed to last forever, nobody moved. The assassin's eyes studied Marcus, probably calculating their chances of success. Marcus kept his sword ready while positioning his body to shield the princess completely. His mind raced through possible strategies and escape routes. The silence was broken by the sound of approaching footsteps from somewhere else in the palace. The assassin's head turned slightly toward the sound, and Marcus knew this was the moment of truth. Within seconds, this corridor would either see violence or the mysterious figure would disappear back into the shadows. The tension in the air was so thick it seemed to press against Marcus's chest. His years of training had prepared him for this moment, but he also knew that one small mistake could cost Princess Elena her life. Everything that happened next would depend on split-second decisions and whether destiny truly had other plans for them all. The masked assassin's grip tightened on the throwing knife. Marcus could see the subtle shift in their stance that meant they were about to strike. Without warning, the assassin's arm moved in a perfect arc, sending the deadly blade spinning through the air toward Princess Elena. Time seemed to slow down as Marcus watched the knife hurtle through the corridor. His body reacted before his mind could fully process what was happening. He threw himself sideways, trying to intercept the weapon's path. The blade whistled past his ear so close he could feel the air displacement against his skin. But something impossible happened. The knife, which should have continued its deadly trajectory toward the princess, suddenly veered off course. It struck the stone wall with a sharp clang and clattered to the floor, its blade now chipped and useless. Marcus couldn't understand what he had just witnessed. The assassin stood frozen in shock, staring at the fallen weapon. They had thrown the knife with perfect technique, the same way they must have killed countless times before. There was no explanation for why it had missed its target so dramatically. Princess Elena pressed herself against the wall, her face pale, but her eyes alert. She had seen the knife's strange flight path too, and she whispered a quick prayer of gratitude. Something beyond human understanding had just saved her life. Marcus didn't waste time wondering about the mysterious deflection. He charged forward, his sword now fully drawn and gleaming in the torchlight. The assassin snapped out of their shock and reached for another weapon, this time pulling a curved dagger from their belt. The two fighters met in the center of the corridor with a clash of steel against steel. The assassin was incredibly skilled, their movements fluid and precise like a deadly dance. They struck and retreated, testing Marcus's defenses and looking for any opening. Marcus had trained with the best swordsmen in the kingdom, but this assassin fought with techniques he had never seen before. Their style was foreign, probably learned in distant lands where different schools of combat were taught. Every attack came from an unexpected angle, making it difficult for Marcus to predict their next move. The narrow corridor worked both for and against Marcus. While it prevented the assassin from circling around to reach the princess, it also limited his own movement. He couldn't use the wide, sweeping attacks that his training emphasized. Instead, he had to rely on quick thrusts and defensive blocks. Princess Elena watched the battle with growing concern. She could see that Marcus was holding his own, but the assassin showed no signs of tiring. If anything, they seemed to be growing more aggressive with each exchange. She gripped her hidden dagger tighter, knowing she might need to defend herself if Marcus fell. The assassin suddenly feinted left and then spun right, their blade seeking Marcus's ribs. Marcus barely managed to twist away, feeling the sharp steel slice through his armor and draw blood from his side. The wound wasn't deep, but it reminded him that one serious mistake would end everything. Fighting through the pain, Marcus pressed his attack. He used his superior strength to rain down powerful strikes that forced the assassin backward. His sword work became more aggressive, each blow designed to overwhelm rather than finesse. The assassin gave ground, but their defense remained solid. That's when Marcus noticed something strange about his opponent. Despite their skill and training, the assassin kept glancing toward the windows that lined one side of the corridor. It was as if they were watching for something or perhaps planning an escape route. The realization gave Marcus an idea. Instead of continuing his frontal assault, he began to maneuver the fight toward the center of the corridor, away from the windows. The assassin tried to resist this positioning, confirming Marcus's suspicion that they needed access to those windows for some reason. As they fought, more sounds echoed through the palace. Other guards had apparently heard the clash of weapons and were responding. The assassins' movements became more desperate, their attacks wilder and less controlled. They knew their time was running out. In their desperation, the assassin made a critical error. They overextended during a particularly aggressive thrust, leaving their left side exposed for a split second. Marcus didn't hesitate. His sword found its mark, sliding between the assassin's ribs and drawing a gasp of pain from behind the mask. The assassins staggered backward, one hand pressed to their wounded side. Dark blood seeped between their fingers, staining their black clothing. But instead of surrendering or collapsing, they did something that surprised both Marcus and the princess. The assassin laughed. It was a bitter, hollow sound that echoed off the stone walls. They straightened up despite their injury and fixed their gaze on Princess Elena. When they spoke, their voice was distorted by the mask, but the words were clear enough. "This changes nothing," the assassin said. "You cannot protect her forever, guard. We know where she sleeps, where she walks, where she finds comfort. Today was just the beginning." Before Marcus could respond, the assassin threw something small toward the floor near the windows. It struck the stone and released a thick cloud of acrid smoke that filled the corridor in seconds. Marcus heard the sound of breaking glass, followed by the whistle of wind through a newly opened window. By the time the smoke cleared, the assassin was gone. Only droplets of blood on the floor and the broken window proved that the encounter had been real. Marcus rushed to the window and looked out, but there was no sign of the masked figure in the courtyard below. Princess Elena approached slowly, her composure remarkable considering what had just happened. She looked at the blood on Marcus's side with concern, but he assured her the wound wasn't serious. Together they examined the broken knife that had mysteriously missed its target. How did the knife change direction like that? Princess Elena asked, voicing the question that was troubling them both. Marcus picked up the weapon and studied it carefully. The blade was definitely real, sharp enough to kill. There was no mechanism or trick that could explain its impossible flight path. He shook his head, unable to provide an answer that made sense. The sound of running footsteps announced the arrival of other guards. Captain Rodriguez appeared at the head of a group of 6 armed men, all breathing heavily from their sprint through the palace corridors. Their expressions shifted from alarm to confusion as they took in the scene. "What happened here?" Captain Rodriguez demanded, noting the broken window, the blood on the floor, and Marcus's wounded side. As Marcus began to explain the attack, Princess Elena found herself thinking about the assassin's final words. The threat had been specific and personal. This wasn't a random attempt at violence, but part of something larger and more dangerous. Someone wanted her dead badly enough to send a professional killer into the heart of the royal palace. The failed assassination had raised more questions than it answered. Who was behind the attack? How had the assassin gained access to the secured royal corridors? And most mysteriously, what force had caused that throwing knife to miss its target when failure should have been impossible? Marcus finished his report to Captain Rodriguez, but he kept thinking about the strange events he had witnessed. His rational mind wanted to dismiss the knife's deflection as a lucky accident, but something deep inside him whispered that darker forces were at work in the kingdom. 3 days had passed since the assassination attempt, and the entire palace remained on high alert. Extra guards patrolled every corridor, and Princess Elena was never allowed to walk anywhere alone. Marcus had barely slept, spending his time investigating how the assassin had gained access to the royal wing. The palace physician had treated Marcus's wound, which was healing well despite leaving him with a constant reminder of how close they had come to disaster. More troubling than the physical pain was the mystery of the deflected knife, which seemed to defy all logic and reason. King William had summoned Marcus to his private study that morning. The king was a tall, imposing man in his 50s, with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. He had ruled the kingdom for over 20 years, and had survived 3 previous assassination attempts, making him an expert on palace security. "Tell me again about the knife," King William said, settling into his leather chair behind an enormous oak desk. "Leave out nothing, no matter how strange it might sound." Marcus recounted the events once more, describing exactly how the blade had changed direction in mid-flight. The king listened without interruption, his fingers steepled under his chin. When Marcus finished, the king was quiet for a long moment. "My father once told me a story," King William finally said. "He claimed that our family was protected by something beyond human understanding. I always thought it was just an old man's fantasy, but perhaps I was wrong." The king walked to a bookshelf and retrieved an ancient leather journal. Its pages were yellowed with age, and the binding was cracked from centuries of handling. He opened it carefully and showed Marcus a page filled with elegant handwriting in an old dialect. "This belonged to my great-great-grandfather, King Edmund," the king explained. He wrote about similar incidents during his reign: arrows that missed their targets, swords that broke at crucial moments, poisons that somehow became harmless. He believed our bloodline was blessed. Marcus studied the ancient text, though he could only understand a few words of the old language. The implications of what the king was suggesting were staggering. Could supernatural forces really be protecting the royal family? Whether you believe in blessings or not, King William continued, someone is clearly determined to kill my daughter. The assassin's words suggest this was only the beginning. We need to be prepared for what comes next. The king revealed that his spies had been investigating the attack. They had discovered that several foreign merchants had entered the kingdom the previous week, and at least 2 of them had disappeared after the assassination attempt. It appeared that enemies from outside their borders were involved. Meanwhile, Princess Elena was struggling with her own thoughts about the attack. She had always been brave, but knowing that professional killers were hunting her had shaken her confidence. She found herself looking over her shoulder constantly and jumping at unexpected sounds. That afternoon, she was in the palace library when Marcus found her. She was reading an old book about the history of the kingdom, specifically the chapters dealing with past threats to the royal family. Her expression was troubled as she looked up from the pages. "I've been thinking about what that assassin said," Princess Elena told Marcus. "They knew things about me, about my daily routines. Someone inside the palace must be helping them." The possibility of a traitor among the palace staff was something Marcus had also considered. The assassin had moved through the royal corridors with confidence, suggesting they had detailed knowledge of the palace layout and security procedures. Such information could only come from someone with regular access to the royal wing. Together, they began to review the people who had that level of access. There were the senior guards, the personal servants, the kitchen staff who brought meals to the royal quarters, and the cleaning crews who maintained the private areas. Any one of them could be passing information to enemies outside the palace. Their discussion was interrupted by a commotion in the courtyard below. Through the library window, they could see guards surrounding a figure near the main gate. Marcus immediately moved to get a better view, his hand instinctively reaching for his sword. The person at the center of attention was a young woman in servant's clothing. She was crying and appeared to be pleading with the guards about something. Marcus recognized her as Sarah, one of the kitchen maids who often brought food to the royal dining room. Captain Rodriguez was questioning Sarah intensely, and even from the library window, Marcus could see that she was terrified. After several minutes, the captain nodded to his men, and they escorted Sarah into the palace. Marcus knew they were taking her to the detention chambers for further questioning. "We should find out what that was about," Princess Elena said, closing her book. They made their way to Captain Rodriguez's office, where they learned the disturbing details of Sarah's confession. The young woman had admitted to accepting money from a stranger in exchange for information about Princess Elena's daily schedule. She claimed she needed the money to help her sick mother, and had no idea it would be used for an assassination attempt. The stranger had approached Sarah in the market 3 weeks earlier. He was well-dressed and spoke with a slight accent she couldn't identify. He had asked seemingly innocent questions about the princess's routines, when she took meals, where she liked to walk, and which corridor she used most frequently. Sarah's information had allowed the assassin to know exactly when and where Princess Elena would be walking that morning. The timing of the attack had been perfect, which explained how the killer had been waiting in position with such confidence. "What will happen to her?" Princess Elena asked Captain Rodriguez. "That depends on the king's judgment," the captain replied. "She was used by our enemies, but her actions nearly cost you your life. The law is clear about treason, even unintentional treason." Princess Elena felt torn between anger and sympathy. Sarah's betrayal had put her in mortal danger, but the girl was clearly a victim herself, manipulated by people who understood her desperation. The princess made a mental note to speak with her father about showing mercy. As evening approached, Marcus was making his rounds through the palace when he noticed something unusual. One of the newer guards, a man named Thomas who had joined the Royal Guard only 2 months earlier, was walking through an area he wasn't assigned to patrol. Marcus followed at a distance. watching as Thomas made his way to a seldom-used storage room in the lower levels of the palace. The guard looked around nervously before entering the room, staying inside for several minutes before emerging empty-handed. Suspicious, Marcus waited until Thomas left the area before investigating the storage room himself. It appeared to contain only old furniture and unused decorations, but Marcus searched thoroughly. Hidden behind a stack of chairs, he found a small wooden box that didn't belong with the other stored items. Inside the box were several pieces of parchment covered with detailed drawings. Marcus felt his blood run cold as he realized what he was looking at. The papers contained precise maps of the palace layout, including secret passages and hidden entrances that very few people knew about. There were also notes about guard schedules and detailed observations about Princess Elena's habits. One of the documents was a letter written in the same foreign hand that had paid Sarah for her information. It contained instructions for Thomas to continue gathering intelligence and to be ready to assist with the next phase of the operation. The letter was signed with a strange symbol that Marcus didn't recognize. Marcus carefully replaced the box, exactly as he had found it, then hurried to report his discovery to Captain Rodriguez. The revelation that they had a spy among the royal guards was even more serious than the bribed servant. Thomas had access to highly classified information about palace security, making him incredibly dangerous. The captain immediately began planning how to handle Thomas without alerting him to their discovery. They needed to capture him in a way that would also reveal his contacts outside the palace. If they arrested him too quickly, his handlers might simply send another spy to replace him. As Marcus walked back to his quarters that night, he reflected on how quickly their understanding of the threat had evolved. What had started as a single assassination attempt was now clearly part of a larger conspiracy involving multiple agents and foreign enemies. The mysterious deflection of the assassin's knife was beginning to seem less important than the very real and continuing danger facing Princess Elena. Whether blessed by supernatural forces or simply protected by vigilant guards, she remained a target. The enemy had failed once, but they were already preparing to try again. Marcus knew that the coming days would test every skill he had learned as a royal guard. The palace was no longer a safe haven, but a battlefield where the enemy moved among them in disguise. One wrong step, one moment of carelessness could mean the difference between life and death for the princess he had sworn to protect. Captain Rodriguez had devised a clever plan to catch Thomas the spy. Instead of arresting him immediately, they would feed him false information and watch where it led. Marcus was chosen to be part of the deception, since Thomas trusted him as a fellow guard. The next morning, Marcus approached Thomas during their shift change and spoke loudly enough for several people to hear. He mentioned that Princess Elena would be visiting the Eastern Gardens at noon to meet with foreign ambassadors. It was completely untrue, but Thomas didn't know that. Within hours, the palace's network of informants reported unusual activity near the Eastern Gate. Several suspicious individuals had been spotted watching the area, confirming that Thomas was indeed passing information to enemies outside the palace walls. Meanwhile, Princess Elena was safely hidden in the palace's most secure chamber, surrounded by the king's most trusted guards. She spent the time studying the ancient journal her father had shown Marcus, trying to understand the history of mysterious protections around her family. The journal contained dozens of accounts spanning 3 centuries. Kings and queens had written about arrows that missed their targets, swords that shattered at crucial moments, and even entire armies that had become lost and confused when approaching the palace. The stories seemed impossible, but they were all documented by reliable witnesses. One entry particularly caught Princess Elena's attention. It was written by Queen Isabella, her own mother, just weeks before Elena's birth. The queen had described a vision she experienced during a difficult pregnancy, where a figure clothed in light had promised that her child would be protected by forces beyond human understanding. Reading her mother's words brought tears to Princess Elena's eyes. Queen Isabella had died when Elena was 15, but not before teaching her daughter about duty, courage, and the responsibility that came with royal blood. The idea that her mother's prayers might still be protecting her was both comforting and overwhelming. Back in the main palace, Thomas was growing nervous as noon approached. He had sent word to his contacts about the princess's supposed visit to the Eastern Gardens, but he hadn't received any response. Marcus watched him carefully, noting how the spy kept checking the windows and seemed unable to concentrate on his duties. At exactly noon, Captain Rodriguez put the next phase of their plan into action. He announced loudly that the princess's visit to the Eastern Gardens had been canceled due to security concerns. Thomas's relief was visible, but so was his confusion about why his handlers hadn't acknowledged his information. That afternoon, the captain received a report from his agents outside the palace. They had identified 3 foreign operatives who had been watching the Eastern Gardens. When the princess failed to appear, the operatives had held an urgent meeting before dispersing to different parts of the city. The captain decided it was time to close the trap. Thomas was quietly arrested during the evening meal, when most of the palace staff were occupied with their duties. He was taken to a secure chamber where Captain Rodriguez could question him without interruption. Under pressure, Thomas revealed more than anyone had expected. He wasn't just a spy, but a member of a larger organization, dedicated to destabilizing the kingdom. The group was funded by enemies from across the eastern border who wanted to see King William's family removed from power. The assassination attempt had been only the first step in a complex plan. If the masked assassin had succeeded, the kingdom would have been thrown into chaos over succession, making it vulnerable to invasion. Since that had failed, the organization was preparing something even more dangerous. Thomas claimed he didn't know all the details, but he had heard references to the festival trap. The kingdom's annual harvest festival was only a week away, and Princess Elena was scheduled to make a public appearance before thousands of citizens. The event would be nearly impossible to secure completely. Captain Rodriguez immediately informed King William of this new threat. The king faced a difficult decision: cancel the festival and disappoint his people, or allow it to proceed and risk his daughter's life. The harvest festival was beloved by the citizens and provided crucial economic benefits to merchants and farmers throughout the kingdom. That evening, the royal family held a private council meeting to discuss their options. Princess Elena surprised everyone by insisting that the festival should proceed as planned. She argued that hiding from their enemies would only encourage more attacks and make the royal family appear weak. "If we cancel the festival because of threats," Princess Elena said firmly, "we give our enemies exactly what they want. The people need to see that we won't be intimidated." King William admired his daughter's courage but worried about her safety. Marcus, who had been invited to provide security advice, found himself torn between his duty to protect the princess and his respect for her judgment. Queen Margaret, Elena's stepmother, proposed a compromise. The festival could proceed, but with unprecedented security measures. Every person entering the festival grounds would be searched. Additional guards would be positioned throughout the area, and the princess's public appearance would be shortened and carefully controlled. Marcus suggested an additional precaution. They could use a decoy. One of the palace's female servants, who bore a resemblance to Princess Elena from a distance, could make the initial public appearance while the real princess remained hidden. It would buy them time to identify any threats in the crowd. The plan was risky, but it seemed like their best option. Over the next few days, the entire palace worked to prepare for the festival, while maintaining the illusion that everything was normal. Extra guards were quietly recruited from neighboring towns, and trusted agents were sent to mingle with the festival crowds. Marcus spent hours studying the festival grounds, memorizing every entrance, exit, and hiding place. He coordinated with local militia leaders and established emergency signals that could be used to communicate across the large area. Every detail had to be perfect. Princess Elena used the time to prepare mentally for what might be her most dangerous public appearance ever. She practiced walking routes with the decoy, studied crowd control procedures, and even learned basic combat techniques that might help her if everything went wrong. The night before the festival, Marcus couldn't sleep. He walked the palace corridors, checking and rechecking security arrangements. Something about the situation felt wrong, but he couldn't identify exactly what was troubling him. Near midnight, he found himself in the corridor where the assassination attempt had occurred. The broken window had been repaired and the bloodstains had been scrubbed away, but the memory of that terrifying encounter remained vivid in his mind. As he stood there, Marcus heard a faint sound that made his blood run cold. It was the same bitter laugh he had heard from the masked assassin. He spun around, his hand on his sword, but the corridor was empty. The sound seemed to echo from everywhere and nowhere at once. Marcus searched every shadow and alcove but found nothing. Was his mind playing tricks on him? Or was the assassin somehow still lurking in the palace? The thought that their enemy might already be inside their defenses was terrifying. He immediately reported the incident to Captain Rodriguez, who ordered additional patrols throughout the night. Every room in the palace was searched again, but no trace of the assassin was found. The captain suggested that Marcus might have been hearing echoes from the courtyard below, but Marcus wasn't convinced. As dawn broke over the kingdom, preparations for the Harvest Festival entered their final phase. Thousands of people would soon be gathering to celebrate the year's bounty, and somewhere among them would be enemies determined to turn the joyful occasion into a tragedy. Marcus donned his ceremonial armor, which gleamed like silver in the morning light. He said a quiet prayer for strength and wisdom, knowing that the next few hours would test everything he had learned about protecting those he served. The festival grounds were already filling with excited citizens, their laughter and cheerful voices creating a festive atmosphere that seemed to mock the deadly serious preparations happening behind the scenes. Soon, Princess Elena would have to walk among these innocent people while assassins waited in the shadows. Marcus took his position near the royal platform, scanning the growing crowd for any signs of danger. Somewhere out there, the masked assassin was probably watching and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. This time there might not be any mysterious forces to deflect their weapons. The final confrontation was approaching, and Marcus could only hope that his preparation and vigilance would be enough to protect the princess he had sworn to serve. The festival was about to begin, and with it the most dangerous day of their lives. The Harvest Festival was in full swing by mid-morning. Colorful banners fluttered in the breeze, merchants called out their wares, and the air filled with the delicious scents of roasted meats and fresh bread. Children ran between the stalls, while musicians played cheerful songs that made the whole gathering feel magical. Marcus positioned himself strategically near the royal platform, his eyes constantly scanning the crowd. He had memorized the faces of every guard and trusted agent, so he could quickly identify anyone who didn't belong. The festival grounds were larger than a palace courtyard, making it impossible to watch everything at once. Captain Rodriguez coordinated the security from an elevated position that gave him a view of the entire area. He used hand signals to communicate with guards positioned throughout the crowd, maintaining constant surveillance without alarming the festival goers who had come to enjoy themselves. The decoy plan was working perfectly so far. Maria, the servant who resembled Princess Elena, had made several brief appearances on the platform, wearing the princess's distinctive blue cloak. From a distance, the illusion was convincing, and the crowd cheered enthusiastically each time they saw her. Meanwhile, the real Princess Elena waited in a secure tent behind the platform, surrounded by 6 of the kingdom's most elite guards. She could hear the festival sounds and desperately wanted to join her people in their celebration, but she understood the necessity of staying hidden until the right moment. Marcus noticed his first sign of trouble around noon. A figure in a dark hooded cloak was moving through the crowd in a pattern that seemed designed to avoid the guards' positions. The person was skilled at using other festival goers as cover, appearing and disappearing like a shadow among the colorful throng. He signaled Captain Rodriguez, who immediately directed 2 agents to follow the suspicious figure. But within minutes, the person had vanished completely, leaving Marcus wondering if he had imagined the whole thing. The crowd was so dense and constantly moving that tracking one individual was nearly impossible. The scheduled time for Princess Elena's real appearance was approaching. According to the plan, she would emerge from the tent at exactly 2 o'clock to give a brief speech thanking the people for their loyalty and hard work during the harvest season. The speech would last only 5 minutes before she returned to safety. At 1:45, Marcus noticed something that made his heart race. Near the edge of the crowd, partially hidden behind a merchant's wagon, he glimpsed a familiar mask. The assassin was here just as they had feared. The killer was watching the royal platform with the same cold patience Marcus remembered from their encounter in the palace corridor. Marcus immediately signaled for backup while keeping his eyes fixed on the assassin's location. But when he looked again, the figure had moved. Now they were closer to the platform, blending in with a group of farmers who were eagerly waiting to see their princess. Captain Rodriguez received Marcus's signal and began mobilizing guards to surround the area where the assassin had been spotted. But the crowd was so thick that moving quickly was impossible without causing panic. They had to balance security with the need to keep the festival peaceful. 2 o'clock arrived, and Princess Elena emerged from her tent to thunderous applause from the crowd. She looked radiant in her royal blue dress, her golden hair catching the afternoon sunlight. The people loved her genuinely, and their joy at seeing her was infectious despite the deadly tension Marcus felt. The princess began her speech, her clear voice carrying across the festival grounds. She spoke about the kingdom's prosperity, the farmers' hard work, and her gratitude for the people's loyalty. Her words were heartfelt and genuine, making Marcus proud to serve someone so worthy of protection. That's when Marcus saw the assassin making their move. The masked figure had somehow gotten much closer to the platform and was now pushing through the crowd with obvious purpose. In their hand, partially concealed by their cloak, Marcus could see the glint of another throwing knife. Marcus began, pushing through the crowd himself, trying to intercept the assassin before they could get within striking distance. But the dense mass of people made quick movement almost impossible. He had to be careful not to knock down innocent festival goers while pursuing his target. The assassin was now only 30 feet from the platform, close enough for an accurate throw. Princess Elena continued her speech, unaware of the deadly threat approaching through her adoring subjects. Marcus realized he wasn't going to reach the assassin in time. In desperation, Marcus drew his sword and shouted a warning. "Assassin! Protect the princess!" His voice carried across the festival grounds, causing immediate confusion and panic among the crowd. People began screaming and running in all directions, creating chaos that made the situation even more dangerous. The assassin, knowing they had been discovered, abandoned stealth for speed. They raised their arm and hurled the knife with deadly precision toward Princess Elena, who was now standing completely exposed on the platform. Marcus watched in horror as the blade spun through the air. This time there were no mysterious forces to deflect it, no unexplainable intervention to save the princess's life. The knife flew true and straight, its razor edge glinting in the sunlight as it raced toward its target. But Princess Elena had heard Marcus's warning. Unlike the first attack when she had been caught completely off guard, this time she was ready. She threw herself sideways, her royal training in combat finally proving useful. The knife missed her by inches, embedding itself in the wooden platform with a solid thunk. The assassin immediately reached for another weapon, but Captain Rodriguez's guards had finally fought their way through the panicking crowd. 3 guards tackled the killer simultaneously, bringing them down in a tangle of arms and legs while frightened festival goers scattered in all directions. Marcus reached the platform just as Princess Elena was getting back to her feet. She was shaken but unharmed, though her dress was torn and dirty from her desperate dive to avoid the knife. Her eyes were bright with adrenaline and anger at the attack on her people's celebration. The captured assassin struggled violently against the guards holding them down. Captain Rodriguez personally removed the black mask, revealing the face beneath for the first time. To everyone's surprise, the assassin was a woman, perhaps 30 years old, with short dark hair and a scar across her left cheek. "Who sent you?" Captain Rodriguez demanded. But the woman only smiled coldly and said nothing. Her eyes showed no fear, no regret, only the calculating gaze of a professional killer who had failed in her mission. Marcus helped Princess Elena down from the platform, while the guards searched the assassin for additional weapons. They found 2 more throwing knives, a vial of what appeared to be poison, and a small piece of parchment with writing in a foreign language. The festival crowd was slowly calming down as word spread that the princess was safe, and the attacker had been captured. Many people were asking what had happened, and festival organizers were trying to decide whether to continue the celebration or send everyone home. Princess Elena made the decision herself. Despite the attempt on her life, she insisted on addressing the crowd one more time. Standing on the platform where a knife had nearly killed her moments before, she spoke with a strong, clear voice that carried to every corner of the festival grounds. "My people," she said. "Someone tried to harm me today, but they failed. They failed because I have the protection of brave guards like Marcus, the loyalty of subjects like all of you, and the strength that comes from serving a kingdom worth defending." The crowd listened in absolute silence, hanging on every word. Princess Elena continued, "This festival celebrates our harvest, our prosperity, and our unity. No assassin, no matter how skilled, can destroy what we have built together. The celebration will continue." Her words sparked a tremendous cheer from the crowd, louder than any applause Marcus had ever heard. The people's love for their princess had only grown stronger in the face of danger, and their defiance of the attackers was inspiring to witness. As the festival resumed around them, Marcus couldn't help but think about how different this attack had been from the first one. There had been no mysterious deflection this time, no unexplainable intervention. Princess Elena had survived through her own quick reflexes and the vigilance of her guards. Perhaps the ancient journal's stories of supernatural protection were just coincidences after all. Or perhaps the real protection came from the courage of people willing to risk their lives for those they served, and the strength that came from the love between a princess and her people. The assassin was led away in chains, but Marcus knew this wasn't the end of the threat. The woman's organization was still out there, still planning, still determined to destabilize the kingdom. This had been a victory, but the war was far from over. The captured assassin refused to speak for 3 days. Captain Rodriguez tried every interrogation technique he knew, but the woman remained silent except for occasional cold laughter that reminded Marcus of their first encounter in the palace corridor. Her determination was both impressive and terrifying. On the 4th day, everything changed. A messenger arrived at the palace with urgent news from the eastern border. Enemy forces had been spotted massing in the forests, apparently preparing for an invasion. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. The assassination attempts had been meant to weaken the kingdom before the real attack began. King William immediately called a war council. The kingdom's military leaders gathered in the Great Hall to discuss strategy and defenses. Princess Elena insisted on attending despite the recent attempts on her life, arguing that as heir to the throne, she needed to understand the threats facing their people. Marcus was assigned to guard the princess during the war council, positioning himself where he could watch both the entrances and the assembled nobles. Even surrounded by the kingdom's most trusted advisors, he remained vigilant for signs of betrayal or hidden enemies. The reports from the border were grim. The enemy army was estimated at over 5,000 soldiers, significantly larger than the kingdom's standing forces. Worse, they appeared to be well-equipped and professionally trained, suggesting backing from a major foreign power. General Harrison, the kingdom's military commander, laid out their defensive options. They could retreat to the capital and withstand a siege, or they could march out to meet the enemy in open battle. Both choices carried enormous risks, and the outcome would determine the kingdom's survival. Princess Elena surprised everyone by proposing a third option. "What if we strike first?" she suggested. "Instead of waiting for them to attack us, we could hit their forward scouts and supply lines. Make them fight on our terms instead of theirs." The war council erupted in debate. Some nobles thought the princess's plan was too aggressive and dangerous. Others argued it was brilliant strategy that could give them a crucial advantage. King William listened to all opinions before making his decision. "We will combine all 3 approaches," the king announced. "Elena will lead a small force to harass their advance units and gather intelligence. General Harrison will prepare our main army for either siege defense or open battle, depending on what we learn, and Marcus will ensure my daughter's safety throughout the operation." Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. Leading the princess into enemy territory seemed like madness, but he understood the strategic value of her plan. If they could disrupt the enemy's preparations and gather information about their strength and intentions, it might save the kingdom. The planning session continued late into the night. Princess Elena would take 50 of the kingdom's best scouts and cavalry, moving fast and light to avoid detection. Their mission was to strike quickly at enemy supply convoys and retreat before reinforcements could arrive. Marcus worked with Captain Rodriguez to select the force's personnel. They chose only volunteers with proven loyalty and combat experience. Every man knew the dangers they would face, but they also understood how much the kingdom's survival depended on their success. 2 days later, the expedition departed before dawn. Princess Elena rode at the head of the column, wearing light armor that allowed for quick movement while still providing protection. Marcus stayed close beside her, his horse loaded with extra weapons and supplies. The journey to the border took them through forests and farmland that showed signs of enemy activity. They passed abandoned villages where families had fled rather than face the approaching invasion. The sight of empty homes and dead livestock filled the soldiers with determination to protect their homeland. On their second day out, they encountered their first enemy patrol. 8 foreign soldiers were moving along a forest road, apparently scouting for the main army. Princess Elena's force attacked from ambush, overwhelming the patrol quickly and quietly. The prisoners they captured provided valuable intelligence. The enemy army was larger than expected, closer to 7,000 troops, and they were planning to attack in just 5 days. Even more concerning, they had information about the kingdom's defenses that suggested more spies were operating inside the palace. That night, as they camped in a hidden valley, Princess Elena asked Marcus about his thoughts on destiny and protection. The mysterious deflection of the first assassin's knife was still troubling both of them, especially now that they were facing such overwhelming odds. "Do you think my family really is protected by supernatural forces?" she asked as they sat by a small campfire. Marcus considered his answer carefully. "I think you're protected by something more powerful than magic," he said finally. "You're protected by the love of your people, the loyalty of your guards, and your own courage. Those things are real and reliable in ways that supernatural forces might not be." Princess Elena smiled at his response. "You're probably right, but I have to admit, a little divine intervention wouldn't hurt right now." Their conversation was interrupted by a scout reporting movement in the distance. A large enemy supply convoy was approaching along the main road, heavily guarded but potentially vulnerable to a well-planned attack. This was exactly the kind of target they had come to find. The attack on the supply convoy went perfectly. Princess Elena's force struck from 3 directions simultaneously, overwhelming the guards and destroying wagons full of weapons and food. They retreated before enemy reinforcements could arrive, but not before gathering more intelligence about the invasion plans. Over the next 2 days, they conducted 4 more successful raids. Each attack weakened the enemy's logistical support, while providing information about their strength and strategy. But Marcus could see that their luck couldn't last forever. The enemy was adapting to their tactics and setting traps. On their final night in enemy territory, disaster almost struck. They had been betrayed by someone who knew their planned route. A force of over 200 enemy soldiers surrounded their camp just before dawn, cutting off all escape routes. The battle was desperate and chaotic. Princess Elena fought with the skill her royal training had given her, but they were massively outnumbered. Marcus stayed close to her side, protecting her from enemy soldiers who recognized her value as a prisoner. Just when defeat seemed certain, reinforcements arrived. General Harrison had sent a rescue force after their scouts reported the trap. The arrival of fresh troops turned the tide of battle, allowing the princess's expedition to fight their way to freedom. The ride back to the capital was triumphant despite their losses. They had gathered crucial intelligence about the enemy army's plans and weakened their supplies significantly. Most importantly, Princess Elena had proven herself as a military leader, earning the respect of every soldier who served under her. King William welcomed them back with relief and pride. The information they had gathered allowed him to position the kingdom's defenses perfectly for the coming invasion. When the enemy army finally attacked 3 days later, they found the kingdom ready and waiting. The battle was long and brutal, but the kingdom's forces fought with desperate courage. Princess Elena commanded the cavalry reserves, leading charges that broke enemy formations at crucial moments. Marcus fought at her side throughout the day, their partnership now tested by the ultimate trial of combat. As the sun set on the battlefield, the enemy army was in full retreat. The kingdom had survived its greatest threat, though at a terrible cost in lives and resources. The victory belonged to everyone who had fought, but Marcus knew that Princess Elena's leadership had been crucial to their success. In the weeks that followed, the captured assassin finally broke her silence. Facing execution for her crimes, she revealed the full scope of the conspiracy against the kingdom. The organization that had sent her was finally exposed and destroyed. Its members captured or fled beyond the borders. Months later, as Marcus stood guard outside the royal chambers, he reflected on all that had happened. The mysterious deflection of that first knife might never be explained, but he had learned something more valuable than supernatural protection. He had learned that true strength came from the bonds between people who cared for each other. Princess Elena was protected not by magic, but by the devotion of subjects who would die for her, guards who would stand against any enemy, and her own unbreakable will to serve her kingdom. The kingdom was at peace again, stronger than before because of the trials they had endured together. Princess Elena had grown from a protected royal into a proven leader, ready to rule when her time came. And Marcus had evolved from a simple guard into a trusted advisor and friend. As he watched the sun set over the palace gardens, Marcus smiled at the memory of that terrifying moment when the assassin's knife had impossibly missed its target. Whether by divine intervention, pure chance, or destiny itself, that deflection had started a chain of events that ultimately saved the kingdom. Perhaps that was the real magic, not supernatural forces changing the laws of nature, but the amazing things that could happen when ordinary people found the courage to do extraordinary things. In the end, that might be the most powerful protection of all.